Indeterminacy, Experimentalism and Minimalism, Lecture number 6. Who is this happy chap? Well, his name is John Cage, and he was the founding father of the movement often known as the experimental music movement. He had lots of ideas about indeterminacy, chance music, and other radical ways of organising sound.
When I hear what we call music, it seems to me that someone is talking, and talking about his feelings or about his ideas of relationships. But when I hear traffic, the sound of traffic here on 6th Avenue, for instance, I don't have the feeling that anyone is talking. I have the feeling that sound is acting. And I love the activity of sound. What it does is it gets louder and quieter, and it gets higher and lower, and it gets longer and shorter. It does all those things which I'm completely satisfied with that. I don't need sound to talk to me. We don't see much difference between time and space. We don't know where one begins and the other stops. So that most of the arts we think of as being in time, and most of the arts we think of as being in space. Marcel Duchamp, for instance, began thinking of thinking of music as being not a time art, but a space art. And he made it a piece called Sculpture Musicale, which means different sounds coming from different places and lasting, producing a sculpture which is sonorous and which remains. People expect listening to be more than listening. And so sometimes they speak of inner listening, or the meaning of sound. When I talk about music, it finally comes to people's minds that I'm talking about sound that doesn't mean anything, that is not inner, but is just outer. And they say, these people who understand that finally say, you mean it's just sounds? Thinking that for something to just be a sound is to be useless. Whereas I love sounds just as they are. And I have no need for them to be anything more than what they are. I don't want them to be psychological. I don't want a sound to pretend that it's a bucket, or that it's a president, or that it's in love with another sound. I just want it to be a sound.
Cage's early studies were with Schoenberg, but Schoenberg didn't think Cage much of a composer. I guess Cage's ideas were in some ways too radical even for Schoenberg. His early works were often to do with the idea of sounds through time, and he wrote lots of percussion pieces. He also wrote dance score collaborations with the choreographer Merce Cunningham. On some occasions he had need to write these dance scores in a real hurry, and instead of writing a piece for a whole percussion ensemble, he had to come up with a solution that worked for him. And one of the ways that worked for him was the prepared piano, in which he put all sorts of objects inside a piano to create percussive sorts of sounds. Let's have a look at and a listen to some music for this prepared piano. As I mentioned before, Cage was interested in the idea of chance music. The use of chance processes determined compositional decisions. For example, the use of the I Ching, which is a form of Chinese kind of characters. The tossing of coins, the rolling of dice to determine pitch, rhythm, and dynamics. So these create fixed musical results, and we can compare those to the use of serialism, where numbers were used to create these fixed results. Following on from chance's indeterminacy, and that leaves a range of compositional decisions up to the performer to complete. And a third element is limited indeterminacy, which fixes some musical elements and leaves others up to the performer. For example, a certain or limited number of decisions in order to resolve themselves. This slide shows Fontana Mix, which is an example of a piece which uses indeterminacy. Fontana Mix uses a total of 20 pages of graphic material, and there are 10 different pages which are covered with different sorts of curved lines and transparencies all overlaid on top of each other. And the different lines and grids and so on interact with the dots, and they move different ways around on a kind of slide, or a circular slide. In accordance with the specific system and using the intersecting points as a raster screen, 2 of the pages produce connecting lines and measurements that can be freely assigned to musical occurrences such as volume, tone, colour and pitch. The interpreter no longer finds a score in the customary sense, but rather a treatment manual for the notation of a piece of music in a different sort of way. Perhaps even more radical is John Cage's notorious piece 4 minutes 33 seconds, where a performer or performers sit silently on stage. The whole idea is not necessarily about silence per se, but about the sorts of noises and sounds that go on around us. And if we listen to these in a kind of musical framework, do these create a semblance of musical movement in their own way?
Cage wrote 4 minutes 33 as a piece in 3 movements where the performer does absolutely nothing, allowing the audience to absorb the sounds around them. Everyone experiencing the piece in a different way, therefore, because we all hear things in a different way. Tonight the piece is being presented in a full orchestral version conducted by Lawrence Foster. He's going to give a downbeat to each of the 3 movements. He'll turn pages when he needs to, and of course the orchestra will remain silent, we hope, throughout the piece. I reckon Cage would have been pretty pleased that this piece is being televised, because of course you at home are going to experience this piece in a very different way to those of us here in the hall.
Well, I promise you, this is the piece everyone here tonight has come to experience. There really is nothing like John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds.
John Cage was an important figure in the founding of the Fluxus movement in New York in the 1960s. Another artist who you might know of in this movement was Yoko Ono, who was John Lennon's wife. This Fluxus movement looked at really radical ideas such as 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Here is an example by our lovely furry friend Lamont Young in his piano piece for David Tudor No. 1, where he asks, "Bring a bale of hay and a bucket of water onto the stage for the piano to eat and drink. The performer may then feed the piano or leave it to eat by itself. If the former, the piece is over after the piano has been fed. If the latter, it is over after the piano eats or decides not to." So Lamont Young wrote a lot of these sorts of little text box pieces. They're lots of fun. And the other one that's on the slide is composition 1960 No. 7, where he asks this note to be held, or this chord to be held, for a very long time. Well, it says for a long time. Maybe we should emphasize very long time, because there are YouTube performances out there which go for days at a time. And people who participated in these performances noted that they went into kind of all sorts of strange hallucinations, and they heard lots of different sorts of sounds other than that which is held in a particular note. So the idea of holding things for a very long time led to a movement called minimalism.
Reich rejected 12-tone music. For him, it bore no relationship to the world around him.
This is not Europe. This is America. This is, John Coltrane's playing at a jazz workshop. There are, hamburgers being sold. There's this Motown on the radio. How can you pretend in a world like that you're living in the dark brown angst of Vienna at the turn of the century? Or even that you're living in a bombed-out Cologne at the Westdeutsche Rundfunk in 1945? It's just not true.
What intrigued Reich was a purer tonality he was hearing in jazz.
John Coltrane was, from the middle 60s on, playing a lot of notes on almost one or two harmonies. Africa Brass, which was the piece that made the biggest impression on me, is a half an hour on E. And you would say, well, it's impossible. It's going to be boring. You can't sustain that. But he did. Well, how? Well, by having incredible range between screaming and noise and pure melody, and through changes of timbre, incredibly melodic inventiveness, incredible rhythmic complexity, you can stay put harmonically and make a music which is interesting. So this was a big lesson for me and for many, many others of my generation.
Reich, along with Terry Riley and other West Coast composers, wanted to write music with a simpler tonality, crystallized in Riley's piece called In C.
I played in the piece with a lot of problems in rehearsal staying together, and I suggested to Terry, why don't we have somebody, the good drummer, why don't we have somebody sort of drumming out something like C's that'll just keep us all together, and that's how the pulse entered the piece. But in all honesty, while I contributed that detail, I certainly learned from that piece enormously.
Reich developed the idea of repeating short patterns as a compositional technique by experimenting with tape. Using a portable recorder, he went to San Francisco's Union Square, where he recorded a street preacher's warning of a devastating flood.
He began to warn the people. He said, after a while, it's going to rain after a while, for 40 days and for 40 nights. And the people didn't believe him. And they began to laugh at him. And they began to mock him. And they began to say, it ain't going to rain.
At the moment that he said the words, it's going to rain, it's going to rain, actually, melodically, a pigeon took off. And the flapping of the pigeon's wings coincided with those words. So you had, when you looped it, when you cut it so that it's going to rain would go over and over again, you would not only get, it's going to rain, it's going to rain, you would get, you had the pigeon drummer.
It's going to rain, 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 it's going to rain.
I thought, well, okay, I'm going to arrange this so that there's two loops, and it's going to come out so that you'll hear it's going to rain, 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 like 180 degrees apart from each other in a kind of little canon around, like Ferrajaka. And I put on a pair of earphones with one jack plugged into one tape recorder and one on the other, and I pushed the two buttons, and by pure chance, the machines were absolutely together.
It's gonna rain, 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 it's gonna rain.
What's really riveting is this process of starting in unison and gradually separating, passing through all these different canonic relationships, these different mini rounds, and coming to various recognizably musically interesting parts, and then these irrational parts followed by another rational resting part. And finally, if you let it go, it comes back together again.
The effect of this on this listener, was really quite dramatic. I kept hearing very complicated oral material from this. I mean, the Steve Reich tape pieces really are oral moire patterns. A moire pattern is the superimposition of two very, very simple patterns. They might just be parallel lines. When you superimpose them and you move them in relation to each other, you get very complex and unexpected movements. And I think the Reich piece, the tape pieces, work in the same way. They take advantage of the fact that your brain is very creative. It was sort of transferring the job of being the composer into the brain of the listener. So it's saying to the listener, your brain is actually making this piece of music, because you knew what the ingredients were. There's nothing mysterious about how the piece works.
It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain after all.
But I thought, well, you know, this is a machine process. This is something tape recorders do, windshield wipers on a bus do it, bells at a railroad crossing do it, but people can't do that. But it's so fantastic. But people don't do that. And I just thought, well, if people don't do that, then it's just some kind of mechanical gimmick, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life locked up in, you know, in a tape loop machine. And I recorded this little pattern, which became the opening pattern of Piano Phase. And put it on a tape recorder, and sat down, closed my eyes, and said, okay, here we go. And this was going around and around on the tape recorder. I joined it in unison, and I began to try to move as slowly as possible ahead of the tape. And I found, wow, I can do it. And I have to concentrate on listening in a way that I've never concentrated on listening before, to judge that I just move as slowly as possible and don't just jump ahead one beat or get stuck and pull back. It's like a vacuum cleaner sort of pulling you either to one relationship forward or back that's rational, and trying to stay in the middle where it's very sort of spinning around and then get where you're going.
Let's have a little bit more of a look at that piece, Piano Phase, in its Piano Phase, Video Phase format. another early phasing piece called Clapping Music. Here is a short excerpt from Terry Riley's piece In C, which was referred to earlier in the Steve Reich video. One of your composition tasks is to compose a small piece using the same techniques as Terry Riley's In C. Firstly, this involves composing 7 small cells of melodic material. Try it and have the musical material evolve in some way. Then you'll realize the piece using a number of instruments on GarageBand. And the piece need not be more than 5 minutes. So if you're interested in this example, have a close listen to the Terry Riley piece and have a look at the score. Here is another early minimalist piece, this time with a different take. There is a process involved, not unlike the phasing process, but it's an additive and subtractive process. So the patterns lengthen out and they shorten each time. And this is a good example by Philip Glass called 2 Pages. Here's a well-known film score by Philip Glass to a film called Koyaanisqatsi. Post-minimalism is now a very mainstream movement in classical music. It came out of the minimalist movement. It works with ideas of orchestral density, sounds with great pulse-driven complexity of rhythm. It fuses the experiments of the minimalist techniques with more mainstream romantic orchestral and operatic traditions. John Adams is perhaps the most well-known of these composers. Example works are Shaker Loops for string orchestra and Nixon in China, a fantastic opera. The minimalist movement has also been incredibly influential on popular music. Think of Steve Reich's tape loops. They were the beginnings, really, of sampling. A number of DJ artists have done a tribute to Steve Reich in their remixing of his music. We'll have a listen to his Piano Phase remix in a little while. But the influence of minimalism has gone right across the pop music spectrum, from groups like Kraftwerk through to Sufjan Stevens, all of whom have paid their homage to composers such as Steve Reich and Philip Glass.